March 1943, the Atlantic convulses with steel and fire. In just 30 days, 108 Allied ships are lost. Entire convoys vanish beneath the waves. Families sink with the hulls. In London, maps are pinned with grim red markers. One naval officer murmurs, "We are losing this war." And no one realizes it yet. The German U-boats, once prowlers in the shadows, now hunt openly, defiantly. In wolfpacks, Admiral Karl Dönitz believes final victory is within reach. The British lifeline, stretched across the Atlantic, phrased by the hour, and if that rope snaps, Churchill knows the truth. Britain falls. But then, something changes. By May 1943, the same U-boats are fleeing, dozens are destroyed. Dönitz orders a humiliating retreat. His own son dies in the retreating wreckage. So what happened? How did the Atlantic, once a graveyard for Allied ships, become a death trap for the hunters themselves? This is the story of 2 months that changed the Second World War, not with a battle, but with a transformation, a storm of codebreakers, convoy reorganization, sonar pulses, and desperation. This is the silent collapse of the U-boat threat. To understand this sudden reversal, we must return to the beginning of the U-boat war and to the doctrine of tonnage. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz was no ordinary naval strategist. A former U-boat commander in the First World War, he believed that submarines could choke the British Empire to death not by sinking warships, but by targeting the merchant lifeline that fed its people, armies, and colonies. He envisioned a tonnage war, a ruthless war of attrition. If the German Navy could sink more Allied shipping than they could replace, Britain would collapse economically and morally. No bullets on British soil, just hunger, panic, and surrender. At first, the plan worked. In 1940, Dönitz submarines wreaked havoc in what he called die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. Allied convoys were scattered, radar was primitive, and air coverage was patchy. In just one summer, they sank 471 ships. Then came the second happy time, 1942. After the United States entered the war, as American ships operated independently near their coasts, U-boats picked them off with ease. Some German crews nicknamed it the American shooting season. In November 1942, the Atlantic War reached a deadly peak. German U-boats sank 768,000 gross tons of Allied shipping, their highest monthly total of the war. Winston Churchill, already obsessed with the Atlantic front, saw disaster on the horizon. He once confided, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." So at the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, the Allies made a difficult decision. They would delay the invasion of France. The Atlantic had to be secured first, no matter what it cost. But while Allied leaders planned, Dönitz was already executing. At the start of the war, Germany had only 39 U-boats. By early 1943, that number had exploded to over 300, with dozens more under construction. When Admiral Erich Raeder resigned as commander-in-chief of the Kriegsmarine, Hitler appointed Dönitz to the top naval post. For the first time, a submariner was now in charge of the entire German Navy, but even Dönitz knew the clock was ticking. In a grim radio broadcast that January, he warned, "The harsh realities of the submarine war mean that even more difficult times lie ahead of us." Still, in March 1943, the results appeared glorious. Globally, German U-boats and surface raiders sank 120 Allied ships, totaling 704,000 tons, 484,000 tons in the Atlantic alone. To Churchill's ministers, it felt like a catastrophe. One wrote, "We can no longer rely on evading the U-boat packs. We shall have to fight the convoys through them." There was talk, even in Allied command circles, that the Atlantic and possibly the war might be lost. But this panic masked a deeper, quieter truth. Behind the headlines and rising tonnage figures, a subtler story was taking shape, a convergence of technology, intelligence, and doctrine that would soon overwhelm the U-boat fleet. The first major element was intelligence. The Germans had an advantage early on. In December 1941, the Kriegsmarines Beobachtungsdienst observation service had cracked the British naval cipher No. Sen. With this, they could track about 70% of Allied convoys, organizing devastating wolfpack attacks. Every Allied message became a vulnerability, but British codebreakers were not idle. At Bletchley Park, the Ultra program had made significant progress decrypting Enigma communications, particularly naval transmissions. Once considered impenetrable due to the use of four-rotor machines, by early 1943, thanks to captured codebooks and machines, the Allies were again reading U-boat orders with growing speed. However, Ultra alone was not a silver bullet. Delays of up to 72 hours in decryption meant that intelligence was reactive, not predictive. Worse, whenever the Germans changed Enigma settings, Ultra went dark. In fact, for much of 1942, the Allies had no access to naval Enigma at all. To bridge this gap, the Allies turned to technology. In early 1943, more Allied escorts began receiving updated ASDIC sonar, which allowed ships to detect U-boats underwater by bouncing sound waves and measuring echoes. Though ASDIC could not see directly beneath the ship, it gave range and bearing enough for skilled crews to zero in with depth charges or hedgehog mortars. But sonar was only one layer of the defense. On the surface, new 10-centimeter radar began appearing on destroyers and aircraft, a leap forward from earlier models. Unlike German radar, which was bulky and short-ranged, this new Allied radar could detect U-boats as they surfaced to recharge batteries, often in total darkness or through fog. Suddenly, the hunter was visible. Another breakthrough was high-frequency direction finding, nicknamed Huff Duff. This system could triangulate the position of any radio transmission, including the short-wave messages Dönitz required his submarines to send frequently. Huff Duff wasn't just theoretical by 1943. Every Allied convoy had at least 2 escort ships equipped with it, and Dönitz's doctrine played right into Allied hands. His wolfpack strategy required constant radio contact between U-boats and headquarters. That meant every order, every sighting report, every request for resupply became a beacon for detection. During the May attack on convoy SC-130, over 100 Huff Duff intercepts were logged. The Allies essentially tracked the U-boats in real time, not by following them, but by listening to them, and then the air war closed in. For years, the Mid-Atlantic air gap, a stretch of ocean out of range of Allied bombers, had been a U-boat playground. Sailors called it Torpedo Junction, where submarines could surface and attack without fear of aircraft. But in early 1943, that gap began to shrink. Very long-range bombers like the B-24 Liberator were transferred from other theaters. From just 6 aircraft in January, the Allies had 49 VLR bombers patrolling the Atlantic by May. Even old civilian vessels were retrofitted into escort carriers, floating air bases that moved with convoys and launched patrol planes into the void. Now, no U-boat could be sure it was unseen. One British escort commander, watching radar and sonar feeds light up, declared, "I really have hopes now that we can turn from the defensive to another and better role killing them." Allied doctrine evolved too. Convoys were redesigned based on statistical modeling by Professor P. M. S. Blackett, a physicist turned naval analyst. His team discovered that larger convoys actually reduced the chance of being spotted. Fewer convoys meant fewer targets. 8 escorts could protect 48 ships more effectively than 6 protecting 24. This freed up escorts to form mobile support groups, hunter-killer teams that moved independently and rushed to assist any convoy under attack. All this came together in April 1943. That month, 39 merchantmen were lost in the Atlantic. But 15 U-boats were sunk, a steep price that began to alarm German command. Then came May 1943, became known within the Kriegsmarine as Schwarzer Mai, Black May. The catastrophe began with convoy SC-130, a slow-moving column of 37 merchant ships escorted by 8 warships, some equipped with cutting-edge radar and Huff-Duff. The convoy departed Halifax, Nova Scotia, bound for Liverpool. Unbeknownst to its crew, German intelligence had already pinpointed its route. 3 wolfpacks, wwii, untold, and Iller moved into position. In total, 25 U-boats surrounded the convoy. The plan was to ambush in the heart of the air gap, beyond Allied bomber range, but the Allies had a card up their sleeve. Ultra-intelligence had intercepted the German plans. Unfortunately, due to a breakdown in communication, the decrypt was never forwarded to the escort commander of SC-130. The convoy was sailing into a trap, but the Allies didn't panic. They didn't run. Instead, the escort commanders launched proactive sweeps, leveraging radar and sonar to detect and disorganize the U-boats. When the submarines attacked on May 18, the convoy turned sharply. Then again, planes from nearby bases closed in. For the next 3 days, SC-130's escorts repelled attack after attack. The U-boats were hounded, depth-charged, and forced to dive deep, where their effectiveness plummeted and danger skyrocketed. On May 21, Admiral Dönitz called off the assault. The Allies had lost 0 ships. The Germans had lost 3 U-boats. One of them, U-954, carried a name familiar to Dönitz. His youngest son, Oberleutnant zur See Peter Dönitz, died alongside his crewmates. A private tragedy and a public humiliation. Across May, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 U-boats, nearly 1/4 of those in active service. Worse still, many of the lost subs were captained by rookies. By 1943, most experienced commanders were dead or reassigned. The average U-boat captain had less than 8 months of operational experience. One of the few surviving commanders, Peter Erich Kremer, later recalled, "This May situation was quite out of hand. There was talk of Black May. More than 1 U-boat a day was being lost. Morale was broken." On May 24, Admiral Dönitz did the unthinkable. He ordered a full withdrawal from the North Atlantic. U-boat operations would shift to other regions until better technology and tactics could be developed. It was the end of the tonnage war. The Allies had won the Battle of the Atlantic, but it hadn't happened by luck or by miracle. It had happened through relentless adaptation, from radar to sonar, from ultra decrypts to air cover. The Allies had formed a layered web of detection and destruction. Where once the sea was silent and vulnerable, it now buzzed with tracking pulses, aircraft engines, and the coded voices of commanders who knew where their enemy was, sometimes before the enemy did. And Dönitz. He would never regain the initiative, Even after reintroducing new U-boat designs like the Type XXI, the war had moved on. Air superiority, amphibious invasions, and Soviet advances rendered the U-boat a weapon of the past formidable, but no longer decisive. Ironically, Dönitz's own rise mirrored that of the U-boat, meteoric and illusory. In April 1945, after Hitler's suicide in the Berlin bunker, Dönitz became Reichspräsident, head of what remained of Nazi Germany. But it was a position without power. Within weeks, Germany surrendered. Dönitz would serve 10 years in prison for war crimes. And the U-boat fleet, out of over 1,100 submarines built during the war, roughly 850, never sank a single Allied ship. For all its fearsome reputation, the wolfpack strategy collapsed under its own weight and under the weight of coordinated, data-driven, multinational resistance. What if the Germans had won the Battle of the Atlantic? It's not a mere hypothetical. Had Dönitz's U-boats continued unchecked, if Allied codebreakers had failed, or if Bomber Command had refused to divert liberators from Europe, Britain could have starved. By early 1943, London's stockpiles were already running low. Ships carrying food, fuel, ammunition, and American troops were vanishing into the Atlantic deep. Another 6 months of heavy sinkings and the invasion of Europe might never have happened. There might have been no Normandy, no day, no liberation of France, and yet, the crisis never reached that point. Because while Dönitz imagined a world where Britain was strangled into submission, the Allies built a system to counter every advantage he believed he held. Not with one brilliant stroke, but with dozens of coordinated innovations, strategies, and acts of endurance. And that's perhaps the real lesson of the Atlantic War. Not that technology wins wars, but that systems do. That victory does not always belong to the boldest move, but to the side that sees more, adapts faster, listens better. The Atlantic in 1943 was not won by battleships or admirals. It was won in radar labs, decoding rooms, statistical briefings, and midnight flights over dark water. It was won by stubbornness, by dozens of engineers and captains and cryptographers who refused to accept defeat in silence, who stayed one step ahead, even when the enemy thought they were behind. And yet, even as the waters calmed, even as convoys sailed without attack, a darker shadow was rising elsewhere in the Pacific. Japanese submarines and kamikazes awaited, and in Europe, the horrors of the Eastern Front escalated with every passing day. The defeat of the U-boats was a turning point, but it was not the end of danger. It was the opening of a new chapter, one where Allied victory became possible, and where total war, at last, turned against the very regimes that started it. And what of the sea? It remembers. Wrecks still rest beneath the waves. Metal tombs holding sailors from both sides. U-954 lies in silence beneath the Atlantic, where Dönitz's son remains, forever 24. Above them, cargo shipspass, and Navy's patrol. And the ocean swells like it did in 1943, silent now, but never forgetting